Hello everyone and welcome to the ROKER Report podcast in association with the Sunderland Community Soup Kitchen. No Gav unfortunately today, so it's Chris in the host's chair. Not sure if I've drawn the short straw with that one because of course following Sunderland is pretty boring and uneventful, so not much really happens in the world of Sunderland Football Club. But I'm sure we can find one or two topics to cover following the last few days. And to help me make sense of the recent events and dissect a home defeat if we have time, we first have the company of ROKER Report's very own Twitter Spaces extraordinaire, Phil West. Hello, Phil.
Hello, Chris. How are you?
I don't know, actually. I'm hoping I'm going to feel better after we discuss it and kind of dissect it all and go through it. Because I was going to ask you, actually, Phil, because I'm sure quite a lot of the people who listen to the Spaces on Friday. I mean, I don't want to get too much into detail because we'll go through it all, but would you say kind of you've calmed down slightly since, because that was pretty raw on Friday, wasn't it?
Very much so, and I think now, you know, with the passage of a bit more time, I think I've taken more of a kind of a clear perspective on it now. And from my point of view, Chris, we have to crack on, we have to progress, we have to get over the fact that Alex Neil is no longer going to be the Sunderland head coach. It's been a bit of departure, it's going to leave a lot of bad feeling, but there's a game to be played on Wednesday, there's a season that we've got to keep on working through. And I'm starting to move on now, absolutely.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting actually, Phil, because I'm sure people who listen to that will be interested to see, you know, how the mood's changed with you specifically, Phil, because you might be a bit of a barometer. But looking forward to that, Phil. And then in addition to Phil, we have someone who hopefully, fingers crossed, can help us fill in one or two gaps, as well as his usual expert analysis of the game. It is, of course, BBC Newcastle's Nick Barnes. Hello, Nick.
Hello. Yeah, I agree with Phil. Sort of the last 24 hours has given me a sort of a more rounded view of what's gone on over the last 48 hours, if you like. And as Phil says, time to crack on, really. And you know, the next step is Rotherham on Wednesday night. And hopefully we avoid the circus that we had last time round when Alex Neil was appointed. And it took 2 weeks with a maelstrom of things going on all the time during those 2 weeks. So fingers crossed we avoid that.
Yeah. Well, look, let's get into it because there is, because joking aside, there is a lot to get through that's happened over the last kind of 72 hours or 48 hours or, well, it's felt like about a month, but there's a lot happened recently, put it that way. So look, let's cover Alex Neil and all that comes with that story first, and let's try and make some sense of it. And I want to try and kind of go backwards a little bit and kind of work from the beginning because, you know, we'll come on to the events of the last 2 or 3 days and how you saw that unfold, Nick. But to start off, I want to look back at the relationship from when Alex Neil was appointed. I mean, just going back to just a couple of things. I mean, there seemed to be early public criticism by Alex Neil on the January transfer window. Then people picked up on an uncomfortable moment with the manager and the owner at Wembley, which was possibly something, possibly nothing. Then, I mean, there's other similar hints, rumours that I could probably raise along those lines. But before any of this played out over the last couple of days, did any of your interactions in the kind of months prior suggest what the relationships were like behind the scenes?
There were a couple of telltale signs. I think certainly over the last month, and really this has been exacerbated by the transfer window, the press conferences, the pre-match press conferences more than the post-match press conferences, were really sort of, I mean, an exercise I suppose everybody, you know, inevitably goes through in the transfer windows of every press conference asking the head coach or manager, anybody coming in, anybody leaving. And as a result of that, you naturally get some sort of quite tetchy responses sometimes. If things aren't going well, if things are going well, you tend to get a much more considered approach and generally maybe an off-the-record nod that something's going to be happening. But we certainly got over the last 3 or 4 weeks a more and more tetchy Alex Neil, who was clearly becoming very frustrated about the lack of business, if you like, in the window, to a point where it almost looked like there was clearly something not right inside the camp, if you like. Though his tone bizarrely changed. It was almost like a U-turn before the Stoke City match, when he was all very positive and all very forthcoming and suggested to me that someone within the club had said, look, you're sounding very negative. You've got to be more upbeat in press conferences. You've got to, portray the transfer window in a much better light. And so I wasn't unduly concerned because we've been here before. But then on that timeline, we went to Stoke, and it's a bit of a bizarre thing. But after the game, Alex Neil did his usual post-match interview, and it was just with me, actually, because of one thing or another. At the end of the tunnel, at the end of the interview, he shook my hand, which he's never done before. It's a very unusual. You get to know. I mean, now we're post-Zoom, we're face-to-face with the head coach, and you do get to know sort of their tics, their verbal tics, what makes them tick. And he'd never done that before. The last time that happened to me was when David Moyes left the club at Chelsea. On the last day of the season, he came across and shook mine and Phil Smith of the Sunderland Echo's hands by way of saying goodbye. For me, I didn't think too much about it at the weekend at Stoke, but I did feel it did nag at me that was a see you, a shake of the hands, a farewell shake of the hands. Now, as it's turned out, it was. So, my sort of intuition, my suspicion that weekend subconsciously was right. But going back to your initial question about were things going well at the club? I don't think they were. I think there have been issues. But to all intents and purposes, you think if there are problems, people talk them out. You talk them through, and by Alex Neil's demeanour before the Stoke game, everything seemed to be okay. But now, I think we know they weren't. I mean, and there were issues, but it's a strange one because I think Alex Neil, when he came in, my feeling was he's not the sort of coach that will buy into the model that Sunderland have adopted. I think he made a comment soon after he arrived that had he arrived during the transfer window, he would have signed 2 experienced players. And I think what has always, unnerved me, if you like, a little bit, is that he, I think, at the back of his mind, would preferably like a policy where they can sign more experienced players and, if needs be, pay for them. Because the problem is they won't pay for anybody over the age of 24. So if you're looking for experienced players, it's out of contract or free transfers. So I always had that sort of nagging feeling that Alex Neil was never wholly comfortable with the model, if you like. Now, he always made the right noises about, I can work within this, I can, I don't mind this, it's fine, blah, blah, blah. I used to do this at Norwich, but I'm still not convinced that was the case. And I think if you've got a doubt, in the end, it will fester. And I think ultimately, and it's not the reason he left, but I think it's part of the sort of underlying, if you like, reasons for him going.
And just before I kind of bring you in, Phil, I mean, just on a similar thing, Nick, because you just mentioned Christian Speakman there in terms of that relationship. Was there any relationship between Alex Neil and Kirill Louis-Dreyfus, or does Kirill Louis-Dreyfus kind of run things from afar and at arm's length?
That is pretty much the case. I mean, Christian Speakman is the conduit, if you like, for Kirill Louis-Dreyfus. As I understand it, Alex Neil has only had 1 or 2, 3 or 4 conversations with Kirill Louis-Dreyfus in the time that he's been at the club. The conversations are with Christian. Christian Speakman is the mouthpiece for Kirill Louis-Dreyfus. So all everything that's gone on will largely have been orchestrated and dealt with by Christian Speakman.
Yeah. I mean, Phil, you kind of raised a lot of this on Friday on the Twitter Spaces, but and I might be sounding disrespectful now, but the move to Stoke, to be fair, has confused more than just Sunderland fans. I think Paul Merson started hinting at it, and I think he had to slightly backtrack on Soccer Saturday. I think he was about to say he didn't understand it, and we might be biased, but look, I mean, if we're honest, it does suggest that there was more than just football kind of considerations, whether it's something behind the scenes, geography, money, whatever it is. But like I said, it's not just Sunderland fans. I've had messages from Ipswich fans, Tottenham fans, Liverpool fans asking what's going on and why he's made the move. So,
Yeah.
I mean, is that where you're at? That, this is more than just, moving from Sunderland to Stoke. There's more to it than that. And do you think it'll come out?
Yeah, I absolutely do, Chris. And I think, yesterday before the game, in the 15 minutes leading us up to kick-off, when, the atmosphere was really starting to build, I was just looking around the stadium as it was filling up. And obviously I'm speaking through red and white eyes here, but I could not wrap my head around the fact why any coach would want to swap the potential of Sunderland at this moment in time for Stoke City. Now, that's not, I mean that with no disrespect to Stoke, because they're a good traditional football club, but the paths of the two clubs are on, we're on very different trajectories at this moment in time, in my opinion. Sunderland are trying to be forward thinking. They've got this new model in place. They're trying to evolve. They're trying to move the club into a new era. And Stoke have obviously been, hindered by financial fair play. They've got, they've got a lot of kind of older players in their squad, Phil Jagielka, for example. So that did confuse me, to be honest with you, and it still does. And I absolutely think that there is more to this than meets the eye. But I just wanted to pick up on a point that Nick made there. And over the summer, one of my kind of main concerns was how Alex Neil and Christian Speakman could work together, because I think Alex Neil is very much a manager stroke coach of the old school, and I think he wanted to take the path of least resistance to promotion with Sunderland to the Premiership, having gained Championship status. And I think obviously Christian Speakman and the club want to move in a very different direction. So I think there was always the potential there for an element of friction, for maybe not quite getting along in terms of what they saw as their vision for the football club. So yeah, it is a shock in one sense, but there is definitely more to this than meets the eye, and I can't quite pinpoint what it is, but it just all feels to me as if there's something else going on behind the scenes, and I do think it will come out. Yeah, I think obviously Speakman's interview yesterday before the game, he couldn't really say much because obviously the process is still going on. But I think once Alex Neil is confirmed at Stoke and we do have our replacement in, I think then it will all come out in the wash, and I would expect there to be a lot more than we've found out so far.
Can I put a bit of context on this? Because I know what happened Friday, Saturday with Alex Neil and with the club. I mean, this goes back to Alex signed a new contract 4 weeks ago. When I say new contract, it's effectively an embellishment of his existing contract. Still a rolling contract, but the money's gone up and various bonuses and so on. So it was an embellished contract was signed 4 weeks ago. I think the club felt it wasn't worth sort of highlighting because it was effectively, the same contract, but with, more bells and buzzers on it, if you like. What this has all come down to ultimately is money and the club's model. The club has a ceiling at which it won't go above a certain level in terms of paying. To put it basically, they will pay, and in this case, Alex Neil, X amount of money, but they won't go above that. Now, Stoke City, as I understand it, have come in and are offering or are willing to pay, and they will pay double what Sunderland are paying Alex Neil. Ultimately, it's come down to money. Alex Neil is not a sentimentalist. He's not a romantic. He's pragmatic. He's a football man, but ultimately, he's got his own ego as well, if you like, his own ambitions. But, like any of us, if someone came along to me or you in our line of work and offered us double the money, there's a fair chance we'd probably go. Now, I think taking that into consideration, then, as I said at the weekend, if everything was right at Sunderland, Alex Neil would still be here. The fact that he's gone means there's something wrong. Now, part of that is Alex Neil's, I think, disenchantment with, the value, if you like, the club held him in. That his view would be that he's undervalued by Sunderland and that he's valued by Stoke City. Also, added to that is he's close to his family. It's an hour's drive for him from where he lives to Stoke City, which is a factor. But ultimately, I, from what I understand, Alex Neil, there's no problem with he understands the size of Sunderland, he understands the fan base, he understands that anybody, will walk into this club because of the size of club that it is. But the pragmatist in him, the the ego in him, and ultimately the money being offered by Stoke City. And Stoke is a club he knows well, and the owners he knows very well indeed. And the owners got deep pockets. Now they're in FFP at the minute, and they do have to lose 3 players by Wednesday. Next season they can spend again, and that doesn't preclude them spending money on him, for instance, because that doesn't come within FFP. So taking that all in the round, I think both parties to a certain extent are to blame here. I think the club will put their hand up and say, we really should have dealt with this in May after the playoff final, but we've let it go, if you like. And I think Alex Neil probably, with hindsight, might say, well, maybe there's a little element of me throwing my toys out the pram. Maybe I should have reined myself in a little bit, and maybe the two could have met in the middle. But I think it got to a point where too much had gone on in terms of, neither party had come to the table and really thrashed it out, that it was too late, if that makes sense.
Yeah, one of the few things that has actually kind of leaked out, or maybe leaked out. I'm not sure if it's something Alex Neil has maybe shared or something that's possibly just made up social media nonsense. But there has been this line that's been pulled out to say that he felt like he hadn't been backed. Now,
No, that's not true. I mean, I do know that's not true. I mean, he does. There's an issue with some of the fees that have been mentioned, because the fees that have been mentioned for Jack Clark and Dan Ballard are nothing like actually the fees that were actually paid. And that has become a bit of I think social media has sort of exacerbated that and made it a bit of a story, a bit of an issue. Because what's happened is that other clubs have turned around and say, well, Sunderland have been the big spenders. And in fact, they haven't. That's been a bit misleading. But this isn't Alex Neil leaving is not to do with transfers. Yeah. It is. I mean, the bottom line is it is all to do with money.
Well, I mean, you've got me in shock here, Nick, that something was made up on social media and kind of blown up to all proportions. But I mean, but what I was going to ask was, because it could have a kind of a double meaning, whether you back Alex Neil in the transfer market, or as you were saying, Nick, did he feel like the club weren't backing him in terms of saying, you're our man, there's a 5-year contract, there's a wage to reflect being,
yes,
now a championship club.
That's the nub of it. I mean, I don't, and it's in some ways it's a long-term issue with the football club. It's not just, for instance, Alex Neil feeling maybe undervalued. I think the players, the staff, you only have to talk to the stewards on a match day at the Stadium of Light. I think they feel that they're not, they're underpaid, if you like. If someone mentioned to me yesterday, one of the stewards, saying that the stewards at Hartlepool are paid £3 more an hour than they are at Sunderland. There is an ongoing timeline, if you like, of disenchantment amongst staff and so on at the football club. Now, this is something the club's got to, address as they move forwards now with this, Kirill and Steve Davis and Christian. They've all got to embrace that the club's changing, but there are issues that do probably need to get sorted sooner rather than later, because these are the sort of problems that will fester ultimately, and it becomes a bigger problem. But you're right that in a way, what you've just said about, I'm going back to May in Wembley. The club really should have sat down then and said to Alex Neil, let's sort this out. Long-term contract. This is the aim, and that didn't happen. Now that might, both parties can be guilty. I mean, Alex Neil could be guilty of not pushing on the door, for instance, and demanding those talks. The club can be, accused of maybe putting their heads in the sand and thinking everything will be okay. But obviously, it's all come to a head over the last weekend. But ultimately, it's about feeling valued and about rewarding, if you like, people for the work that they do.
Yeah. And you only need to look at the poor ticket office staff and club shop staff as well. But
exactly, that is a good example. Yeah,
that's a whole podcast on its own. I'll bring you in a second, Phil. But just one more question on that, Nick. In terms of being backed, the one additional thing I found was strange was the whole. And Phil, you mentioned that Christian Speakman interview, but I mean, Nick, that whole concept of, well, he's talking to someone else and we're suddenly scrambling and we're making him a new offer. I mean, that whole thing to me just sounds odd and strange, that he's going to talk to a different club and you're suddenly scrambling again saying, oh, we need to make him a better offer. So they must know that there's an issue with that sort of structure in place.
I think I don't think the club will accept it as an issue. I think what the club will say is that we've got a model and the structure's in place now. You may lose the head of the structure in this sense, Alex Neil as head coach, but you've still got a sporting director, chief operating officer, head of academy. Well, they will get a head of academy and so on. There's a structure in place. The theory is, as the theory is at Brentford, Barnsley, I think Brighton's the other club, that the manager or the head coach can leave, but a new one can just slot in and pick up where the last one left off. Do you see what I mean? So it's not like a new coach comes in and then says, right, I want to get rid of all the coaching staff. I want to reshape the academy. I want to reshape the first team. I want to reshape the under-21s. The model that Sunderland have got now means that won't happen. Whoever comes in buys into the model. They come in, they pick up where Alex Neil left off on Friday. They come in, take training on Tuesday, Wednesday, whenever it might be, and their squad's there. Christian Speakman's dealing with Stuart Harvey on the recruitment side. You're involved in that, but ultimately that part of the job has been removed, if you like, from the head coach manager role. So that's where Sunderland are coming from now, and I don't think they see that as a problem. Now, whether that's right or wrong, only time will tell, I suppose, because we won't know if this model's working for another 3 or 4 years when the young players that they've been bringing in now have reached their maturity, if you like, and have they got a value to sell on, which is the whole point of the model. So at the moment, the context is, I don't think the club are unnecessarily panicking because they've got what they believe in, a model that they think works and is sustainable. So now, as I say, whether that's right or wrong, only time will tell. But I think that's where the club has positioned itself at the minute.
Yeah. I mean, just going back to the reaction, Phil, and, kind of a typical fan, I don't know about you, but, since I heard the news, I think it was Friday morning, I was out with the kids. I told them to be quiet while TalkSport was on, and I actually heard the news the first time. I've gone through quite a few emotional states, denial, anger, anger again, resignation, anger again, and then optimism at the end, I think was my journey from memory. And, I saw that we haven't had a manager leave for another club since 1978 as well, so it doesn't happen to Sunderland all that often. But do you think this could actually, in a weird way, galvanise the fans in that we all agree we've been put through the ringer and we agree on something?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was illustrated yesterday. There was a real atmosphere of defiance inside that stadium when that game kicked off yesterday, Chris. When Ready to Go was blasting out and the players were walking on, down the tunnel onto the pitch, everybody was in full voice. There was a real atmosphere. It was an air of, and I said before the game is that it's Sunderland AFC. It's not Alex Neil AFC. I've always said that no man is bigger than the football club. You can't orbit a football club around one man. Because if you put that Messiah label on someone, if and when he leaves, and we saw it with Roy Keane, for example, everyone comes back down to earth with a heck of a bump. So, yeah, I do think that it will galvanise them. And, we'll probably come on to this later in the podcast. But, the performance from the players yesterday was that of a team who were desperate to show that they're still a good team. They're a competitive team. They've got the heart for the fight. And, okay, they might have lost their head coach, but they haven't lost the qualities that head coach instilled in them. And that's important. So, yeah, I do think it will galvanise the fan base, and I think that there was a real sense of togetherness in that stadium yesterday. I thought that before kick-off, I was walking around the stadium before the game, there was a bit of a sense of uncertainty. I mean, it was bizarre to open the match programme and read the notes from a coach who was effectively cleared his desk, is checked out with the club and is on his way to a different employer. That was a bit strange, but nevertheless. But yeah, it was a kind of a sense of, what's going on here type of thing. But like I said, when that whistle blew to start the game, it was down to business, and I thought the players and the fans were absolutely magnificent. So yeah, I do think it will galvanise them, Chris, because you have to remember that, this summer has been one of incredible optimism at Sunderland AFC. There's been a lot of, positivity going around. And I don't necessarily think that Alex Neil's departure will torpedo that. I think that if we get a good replacement in, the team's in a good position, they've got some good players. I don't necessarily think that this really derails things and all the progress that's been made at the club, because there has been a lot of progress made at the football club, certainly on the football side of it. The infrastructure off the field, as we know, is a bit of a mess, and the ticket office is a problem, and the club shop's an issue, and all the rest of it. But on the pitch, there have been great strides made forward. And I'd like to think that Neil's departure will not undo all of that. And as I said, I think if they get a good quality replacement in, as Nick said, it's, they slot in seamlessly. You don't need to rip the whole thing up and start again. I think we could continue with the forward momentum. So yeah, initial pessimism about it on Friday when the news broke, and then you get a little bit angry because you feel a bit like a jilted lover. But then, after the game yesterday and this morning, you wake up and you think, yeah, the football club's still there. We've still got good players. The fans are still there. We're going to keep on moving forward.
Yeah, you do wonder if Alex Neil wrote those programme notes while he was on a conference call during the week with the Stoke, Stoke chairman or something like that. But I mean, just quickly, Phil, on the fans. I mean, do you think everyone's gone in that kind of cycle of, complete anger and bewilderment, and then to a full cycle to think, well, stuff him, what's next?
Well, yeah, I mean, I do think there was, judging by the mood on social media, I do think there are some people who think that Christian Speakman has a role to play in this. And I think that, because you have to, you know this as well as anybody, Chris, there are vast swathes of the fan base who aren't entirely convinced by Speakman. They're not exactly fully behind the model that he's trying to implement. There's a little bit of uncertainty there. And obviously, because of that, the impact that Neil had during his time at the club, obviously ending the League One purgatory, finally ending the playoff curse, getting us back into the Championship, he built up an incredible amount of goodwill. And the narrative was that, Speakman was effectively got off the hook by Neil when he came in, because, there was the transfer window in January wasn't the best, and, we'd flirted with Roy Keane and Neil comes in, etc., etc. So, yeah, I don't necessarily think that the entire fan base is now of an anti-Neil stance. I do think there are plenty of people who feel that he's been hung out to dry by the football club. But I also got the sense during the game yesterday that there's a lot of people who do, as I said earlier, who do feel that, the football club has to be bigger than just Alex Neil. And that's not to downplay the job he did, because he did a phenomenal job. I think that's what makes it even more painful, is that, I think we only kind of scratched the surface of what Neil could have achieved at Sunderland. I think we really could have solidified us in the Championship, maybe even mounted a promotion push with time. But it's not going to happen. Obviously, they've parted ways. But yeah, I think that, I think that by the time that Rotherham game kicks off on Wednesday, hopefully with a new head coach in place, I do think that the memory of Alex Neil will slowly start to fade into the rearview mirror, with an acknowledgement, albeit, of the good work he did. You mustn't forget that, and I don't think people will. But at the end of the day, we have to move on.
Yeah, and maybe it's a case, like you said, Phil, maybe it's a case that Alex Neil felt within the structure Nick described, he just couldn't reach the heights that you're talking about. But I mean, just on a last point about Alex Neil leaving, Nick, you have much more interaction with the players and managers, obviously, than we do. I mean, when it comes to when it comes to moves like this, there was a feeling kind of around the place that state of shock, and there was a lot of rumours that a number of the players didn't react well to the news of Alex Neil leaving. I mean, was there any feeling or suggestion that was the case off the pitch?
Well, I was told the players had gone to see Christian Speakman on Friday to voice their concern or unhappiness, and that's understandable. I mean, I think that one thing that Alex Neil did achieve in the time that he was here, other than the obvious, was he has got a very tight knit group. You've got to hand it to him. What he's engendered within that squad is, a real team spirit. That's down to Alex Neil. He's come in and he's produced that, and it's very, very strong. I think, echoing what Phil said about the performance yesterday, you could see that on the pitch. That is a very, very strong unit. That it's a very strong squad in terms of individuals and as a group. They are very much in this together. And I think, Alex Neil has got to take, much of the credit for that. And so I can understand why the players on Friday would have been, shocked. I mean, they'd have found out from Alex Neil on Friday morning when he went round to say his goodbyes at the academy and having taken training. So I think, that emotion would have been quite raw, I think, on Friday. But I think, they are also, and we saw this yesterday, professional footballers. They've got a job to do. And we could have seen the situation as we did at, earlier in the year, Cheltenham, Doncaster Rovers, where they just imploded. In fact, we saw the opposite. And Corey Evans came out yesterday and we spoke to him after the game. And he said they learned a lot from that experience. They didn't want a repeat of what happened when Lee Johnson left. And that has been taken into this weekend in the game against Norwich. And I think you could see that. Phil's right. This is not a bad group of players. This is a very, very good team. And over the next, 5 days, hopefully it'll be bolstered even more. So fundamentally, it's not broken. And I agree with Phil. We move on now. Whoever comes in picks up the reins, and much in the same way that we are sort of realigning ourselves with what Lee Johnson did to a certain extent. Lee Johnson wasn't a bad manager. When he left, the club were third in League One. That's not bad management. It's just that there were various things didn't work for him, and it had come to a point where, yes, lots was going on, and it wasn't the way forwards. But Alex Neil came in, picked up the reins with what was a good, ultimately, not a bad squad, and we're in that position again now. So it's football. Come back to what Phil said earlier as well, and this is important. I think no one's bigger than the football club, and that football club now goes into a game against Rotherham on Wednesday, and moves on, and that's the bottom line.
Right. On to the match now, because it's easy to forget that there was a match in the last couple of days. A 1-0 home defeat to recently relegated Norwich City, which I think we've mentioned already. Phil, as you've already kind of touched upon, the attitude from the players. We came flying out of the blocks. Pinned Norwich in, high press. But it was just in that period where we just couldn't find that moment. We couldn't find that pass. We couldn't find that finish. And that's when we needed it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting, Chris, that the two league defeats we've suffered so far this season, obviously to Sheffield United and to Norwich, were against teams who have a lot of players who have Premier League experience, and particularly in the case of Norwich. You look at their team that they were able to field yesterday. To all intents and purposes, it's essentially very, very similar to the team that were relegated from the Premier League. And when they're bringing on Todd Cantwell and Timu Pukki from the bench, not even in the starting 11, from the bench, that's where your difference is, really. But, certainly in the first half, the first 45 minutes for Sunderland were absolutely fantastic. They came out, loads of energy, loads of intent, loads of aggression. They were pressing them. I thought that Ellis Sims and Ross Stewart were working very hard up front to keep their Norwich backline under pressure. And we were creating chances. And I think, you said this in your post-match write-up, is that on another day, we do find that killer pass. The ball, we do bury that chance. And the whole dynamic of the game changes. So I think the most encouraging thing, certainly for me, Chris, just looking at the game as a whole, okay, we ran out of steam a little bit towards the end, towards the end of the game, certainly when Norwich brought on their substitutes. But, my big takeaway from the game yesterday, similar to Sheffield United, was we did not at any stage look out of our depth, overawed, bullied physically. And we didn't look as if we were rabbits in the headlights when faced with a very, very capable championship opponent. So I think that was the most encouraging thing. And again, I think that, the qualities, that are being instilled in this team, that real team spirit, as Nick said, this Sunderland team has a better team spirit than any Sunderland team I can remember for a long, long time. It's not a group of fractured players with egos running all over the place. It's a tight-knit, well-drilled squad of football players, and I think that showed yesterday. So, yeah, I think that was a proper championship game yesterday. It was full-blooded. It was full throttle. I thought Norwich actually played very, very well at times as well. I thought they were a very capable opponent. I thought Dean Smith's got them set up really, really well, and they'll be up there challenging for promotion. But again, it's just those fine margins, isn't it? And obviously the move, which I'm sure we'll come on to, that let the Norwiches go. It just goes to show that if you slack, even for a millisecond in this division, you will be punished. So, yeah, I think, obviously the defeat was a setback, but I think the performance showed that this team is capable of being competitive at this level, without a doubt.
Yeah. And Nick, for you, was that how you saw it? That maybe on another day we'd have been 1 or 2 up by half time? Because the other point I wanted to raise about that high press, and we did it. It was great to watch. It gets the fans' backs up. The fans are up for it. But at times, especially in that first half when we were really pressing high, that it did leave us open quite often when we gave a loose pass that Norwich were on it and Norwich broke and looked dangerous. And in the second half, when Dean Smith did something about it at half time, that we didn't seem to have a plan B, and then we struggled after that for a period.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Phil said, but on top of that, as you say, I mean, it is fine lines. I mean, the woodwork twice, one off the line on another afternoon that they could have been goals. I mean, I think Sunderland yesterday at the very least deserved a point, and probably you can argue deserved all three. But this is a cutthroat division, and the difference is, as Phil has said already, is that that's a Premier League squad and a Premier League bench, if you like. And at the moment, Norwich can make those changes and they can affect the game. Sunderland can't affect the game with their bench, and that's become a bit of an issue, at the start of the season. When we look at those two defeats, Sheffield United, and when it was because of indiscipline, we lose a player. And then yesterday, it's because in the last 15, 20 minutes, Sunderland didn't have the legs. And I think, Benno during the game was saying, well, why aren't they getting Embleton on? He's standing on the touchline, get him on. Even though it's only one player, it's fresh legs, because you've got players, you can see like Dan Neil, who's taken his tapes off his socks. He's just shattered. He's back on the halfway line because he can't track back all the way from the penalty area because he's just dead. So the bench at the moment is not strong enough to be able to affect the game in the latter stages, which is where I guess that's Sunderland's Achilles heel at the moment. Where an experienced team like Norwich, that's where they take advantage, as did Coventry on the opening day. That's where these teams, their championship experience, they're canny in that respect. They've got strong benches, they bring on fresh legs, and that's where Sunderland are being punished. Will say I thought Luke O'Nien had his best game this season yesterday. But the fact that he did have a really good game at the back suggests that Norwich did have quite a lot of the ball and were pressing a lot on the Sunderland penalty area. But at the same time, overall, unquestionably, this team doesn't look overawed in this division. Once they get the window over, and hopefully, fingers crossed, they've got 3 or 4 more players in, and they can address this issue of substitutions and the bench, that they're as good as anybody in the division. And I've got no fears of them staying in the Championship this season. It's just those small things, and as Phil said, it's fine lines, it's small margins. Something that Alex Neil has been banging on about, in the time at the club. He always says the difference at this level is you'll be punished for one small thing. You've got to be alert from minute 1 to minute 96. And at the minute, Sunderland is still learning how to deal with that particular problem, if you like. That it's not minute 1 to minute 96 at the moment. Minute 1 to minute 80, they're probably fine. It's minute 80 to minute 96 to me is the big issue at the minute.
Yeah. And I hate to say this, Phil, but building off what Nick's just said there about the substitutions, because we've talked about Alex Neil enough, but Dean Smith made a triple substitution on the hour that changed the game. But you've mentioned that quality that he was able to bring on. But as Nick said, we didn't bring any fresh legs on at all until I think it was about 15 minutes left, when kind of we were then chasing the game. But Alex Neil's had a good record with spotting the need for changes during games. Do you think we actually missed him on the sideline?
I think maybe we did. Yeah, I think maybe we did. Where I was sitting in the stadium, as the minutes were ticking by, there was a pocket of supporters just yelling at the top of the lungs down towards the dugout, make some changes, make some changes, make some changes. And I do think the timing of them was a little bit off yesterday, I have to say. But the other thing as well, Chris, that I'd like to just mention as well is that I think that you mentioned that the full throttle start of the game from Sunderland, and Norwich at times, and as you mentioned, they slowed the game down, they took the sting out of it here and there. They were able to kind of shift the dynamic of the game as the game was still going on. I'd like to see Sunderland be able to master that. And, if for every 15 minutes that you go in full throttle, I think you need to spend a couple of minutes just taking the sting out of it, just dialing it down a little bit, slowing it down, so you're not, absolutely shattered, as Nick said, towards the end of the game, and you can still affect it, So I think in-game management from the players and from the coaching staff could be better. I think that's an area to improve. But again, you're learning about that as the games are going by, and what you might have got away with in League One, you absolutely aren't going to get away with in the Championship in terms of your timing, your substitutions, being able to know when to kind of play for time, etc., etc. So everybody is kind of taking a step into the unknown in that sense, really. I mean, we do have a smattering of Championship experience within the ranks. Obviously, like Danny Bart, Corey Evans, etc., etc. And Alex Pritchard as well. But it's the younger players that have really got to get streetwise here, sharpen up and learn that this is not League One anymore. It's the Championship. It's more open. It's going to be more demanding on you mentally and physically, and you've got to get with that as quickly as you can. So yeah, I think that but the problem at the minute is that when we do turn to the bench, there is a bit of a drop off in quality. And when Dean Smith can turn to his substitutes bench and he can bring on the likes of Pookie and Campbell, we're looking at and we're bringing on Embleton and Roberts, etc. Very good players, but are they that kind of difference maker at that moment in the game? So yeah, I think it could be better, Chris, without a doubt.
Yeah. Well, it sounded like you could hear Gary Bennett screaming to make the changes from where you were sitting. But I mean, just on that, on Phil's point, Nick, and it was clear in the game because Dean Smith kind of changed the game, not only at half time. I think we talked about substitutions, but I think at half time as well, he kind of, even though Norwich weren't on it, and he knew that, you could see him on the sidelines. Dean Smith knew his side weren't on it, but he still changed things because of that, and he kind of matched Sunderland in the second half. But do you think there's that element that our team is a little bit naive at the moment and we're dropping points because of that kind of game management part of the game?
Yeah, I think Phil was spot on. I mean, I think what Phil said was absolutely right. I mean, about this it's a developing team, if you like, and it has got, I mean, bear in mind, of the 25 members in the squad at the moment, I think, added it up the other week, and it's roughly this. I think 15 or 16 of that 24, 25 are 22 or under. You've got Pritchard and Evans and Bart and Wright. So you've got a spine of experience. But you've got your Dan Neils, you've got your Dennis Serkins, and they are still, we forget they're still 20 years old. They're still very, very young. Dennis Serkin a year ago was playing under 23s football. Dan Neil, has only really been introduced in the last year, and he missed quite a lot of last season because Alex Neil came in and felt he was knackered because he was. These are young players who are suddenly thrown into the second tier of English football with how many former Premier League clubs, and how many of those clubs like Norwich have still got Premier League players. This is a huge learning curve for them. And part of that learning curve is game management, is learning how to pace themselves during the game. And you're absolutely right about Dean Smith knowing what to do at half time, and then during the game, all the little tricks to slow it right down, take 5 minutes here. How many times this season have we seen games where the opposition have had a player go down and then, stop the game for 2 or 3 minutes? Actually, there's nothing wrong with them whatsoever, but it's a device for them to stop it, slow it down, regroup. And funnily enough, at Stoke last week, Sunderland were quite canny. They did exactly that thing. Patterson went down with cramp. I mean, how ridiculous is that? How crazy is it the goalkeeper goes down with cramp? But that was done on purpose. The one player, if he goes down, the game can't go on, is the goalkeeper. So they were very, very shrewd in doing that. And that is where the learning curve is coming in, I think, with on the touchline, on the pitch. And that's where, your leaders like Corey Evans and players like that who've got that experience are very important, because they'll be the ones that, and I think it's very interesting that at Stoke last week, Evans is brought on at half time and it changes the game, because Evans suddenly, Alex Neil identified Evans as one of his key players as soon as he came in. And now we've seen why. You can see what Evans brings to this group. And that's where experience comes in. And that's where this squad, as Phil was talking about, has got to learn that side of the game, off the ball and managing the game.
Yeah, and I would argue as well that especially that's true at the Stadium of Light, because it's kind of easier to do those things away from home, Nick, when you haven't got that expectation and the fans expect you to do certain things.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting yesterday, because I agree with Phil in the build-up. I thought, I was asked about what would it be like at the game today. I said, well, we almost know what it's going to be like. Everyone will get behind the team. The build-up, when you hear wise men say ringing out and kick off, that was going to happen. You knew everybody would be behind the team. What was going to be the crux was what happens in the next 20 minutes. If Norwich had scored, the mood might have significantly shifted. but they didn't because Sunderland started so well and they played so well. And so, there is an interesting dynamic at home, and the managers have often talked about it, and Alex Neil has talked about it as well, is the expectation on the players. The pressure on the players at the Stadium of Light is huge, especially young players. But then, I think every coach, every manager will tell you, if you want to play for a club as big as Sunderland, you've got to be able to deal with that. And if you can't deal with that, you're probably not the right player, the right fit for this football club. And it sounds brutal, but there's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah.
You've got to. You're not coming to. I think is it like Jack Ross or one of the managers said at Brentford, you can make 8 mistakes before the crowd get on your back. At Sunderland, it's 1 mistake and they're on your back, and that's the difference.
Yeah. I mean, on that point, as a fan, Phil, 3 games so far at the Stadium of Light, 2 draws and a defeat. I'd argue that all 3 were cracking performances, certainly in periods anyway, of those games. Should we be concerned at all that we're kind of playing so well and not picking up the points that we deserve, or do you just think the results will come?
Yes and no. I think I think sitting back and just kind of convincing ourselves that it's going to happen is dangerous. I think we've got to be proactive and make sure that we make it happen, and that comes from being smarter with game management, better use of substitutions, etc., etc. But on the other hand, and I said this after the QPR game, which was an immensely frustrating result. Again, maybe 2 of those games we should have won. Coventry we should have won. If we'd seen the game out, we win. And QPR we definitely should have won. That was a game thrown away. But I remember, going home after the QPR game and speaking to some, fans on the bus, and I just said to them, I said, there's no issues with this team that we can't fix with a bit of hard work on the training ground and a little bit more, game intelligence. And I think that's the most encouraging thing that I've taken from the home game so far, Chris, is that, the differences between the 3 teams, between the teams we played at home and ourselves, is not particularly massive. There's not a sizable gulf in quality there. And again, I think really it's more to do with kind of fine tuning rather than a complete overhaul of the playing style or our mental approach to the game. So yeah, I think it is a concern to a point that we haven't managed to convert promise into points at home so far this season. But on the other hand, I think certainly I've been pleasantly surprised because obviously, you'll know this, before the season kicked off, one of the kind of the narratives that was going around was, well, this squad was only good enough for 5th in League One, and it was only because of Alex Neil coming in that they got promoted through the playoffs, etc., etc. But, I was of the opinion of, well, you know what, let's give these lads a chance. Let's back them. We've got a young core of players here with a lot of potential. Let's see how they handle it. And as Nick said, with the likes of Dennis Serkin and Dan Neil, to me, look as if they're taken to the Championship with, ease. They've had a few, they've had ups and downs naturally, and obviously Dan Neil's red card was a frustration. But, they are looking very, very comfortable at this level, and there's so much more to come from them as well. So, yeah, I think it is a concern that we aren't quite making that breakthrough at home yet, but we've just got to keep working at it, and I don't think any of the issues we are facing at this moment in time are insurmountable. I think with, whoever the new head coach is, if he can come in, if he can address some of the issues that are hindering us at this moment in time, I think we can absolutely start to turn potential at home into results.
Yeah. I always remember the first season at the Stadium of Light when results weren't quite going our way to the start of that season under Peter Reid. And Peter Reid kept saying that we're making chances, so I'm not concerned. As long as we're making chances, I'm happy because then it'll come. As soon as we stop making chances and creating chances and should be scoring goals, then that's the time. So I'm hanging on to that. I'm hanging on to Peter Reid's assessment of the opening of that season, but to kind of assume things will go right at some point. But let's move on to kind of what's next. And Nick, I'm kind of certainly informed that during your commentary you mentioned the links with Tony Mowbray, and then I think it was mentioned on Sky Sports News. After, I think you were the first person to mention it. I think the Tony Mowbray links. It's weird from my point of view because he's been present at our games prior to the one this weekend, and he was at the game this weekend. It was photographs with people outside the game, before the game started and things like that. So it seems like Mowbray kind of had a few ties. Obviously, the link with Stuart Harvey from the Blackburn days. But it was all prior to Alex Neil leaving. So it's a weird one. And is that just an obvious link because he has those links?
Well, it's an obvious link, but I mean, as we understand it in the latter stages of yesterday, we're led to believe Tony Mowbray is going to be the man coming in. I mean, the club's in a strange position at the minute. They can't really say anything because Alex Neil's not been announced as the new head coach or manager at Stoke. And while that's not been done, to all intents and purposes, Alex Neil is still Sunderland's head coach. So the club's in a bit of a strange position with this. And I think that was what led to a little bit of sort of confusion yesterday afternoon as to where they are exactly and what they can say and what they can't say. But I mean, as far as we in the sort of media were concerned, the way we've sort of seen it now is that it will be Tony Mowbray. And it's now just a case of waiting for Stoke to make their announcement and for the agreement with Tony to be sorted out. The one thing I think they were very conscious of this time was they don't want this 2-week hiatus like they had when Alex Neil came in. They wanted to get things done swiftly. And if you look at it objectively, Tony Mowbray lives in Yarm. He's an experienced Championship manager. He's been watching Sunderland. He knows Christian Speakman. It sort of fits all the ticks, if you like, for the club looking to bring in someone swiftly and avoid a long drawn out process where they interview however many potential coaches, because they've got a game on Wednesday, then next Monday and onwards, So I think it does look at the moment very much, like it's going to be Tony Mowbray. I mean, the caveat to that is you just never quite 100% sure. But the way we understand it is that does look to be the situation.
Yeah, but I mean, just on that point that he knows Christian Speakman, he knows Stuart Harvey. You assume that the club had a drawer in some, had a list in some drawer, that a list of names in case.
Well, they have. I mean, Christian Speakman said before, he talks about his database of players, but in the same way, he's got a database of potential coaches, and he's always said that when one leaves, we've got a list here. We go straight into that list and start sort of making the contacts and ringing round. I think they've been shocked into acting quickly here but basically a phone call on Friday from their current head coach or Stoke to say, well, Alex is going, and then suddenly they need to do something quickly. And I think Tony Mowbray being on the spot, if you like, did actually solve a lot of problems for Sunderland.
It was just kind of sheer circumstance and coincidence that Tony Mowbray's been coming along to the games and then suddenly there's an opening and he goes straight in. To be honest, I think that is coincidence. I think he's just taking in football. I mean, Benno knows him well. I mean, he's known him for years because he used to coach Andre, Benno's son. Tony's a football man. I think he, as I say, he lives in Yarm. And I suspect if you spoke to Middlesbrough fans, he's probably been going to as many Middlesbrough games as he's been going to Sunderland games. I think he's just taking in football matches, keeping his hand in. I think with the view down the line that another job will come up. I mean, I don't suppose he saw this one coming. Like I don't think any of us saw it coming. A week ago. So as in, we know in football things happen very very quickly, yeah. And they have here exceptionally quickly. I mean, as someone pointed out, there was a tweet actually before the weekend or over the weekend that said, knowing Sunderland, here's Stoke who've managed to appoint a manager within a day of sacking their old one. Sunderland will probably take 3 weeks and appoint another Parky. So, and I can understand that sentiment. And I think this time round, they've tried to avoid that scenario and they've tried to react quickly in the same way that Stoke have reacted to getting, to sacking Michael O'Neill, which I understand there was a decision being made even before the Sunderland game and appointing Alex Neil. Yeah, I think there's on the old Sunderland annuals behind me at the minute. I think there's a few pictures of Gary Bennett and Tony Mowbray, challenging in the air and stuff like that. I'm sure they had quite a few battles back in the day for Sunderland and Middlesbrough. But I mean, Phil, on Tony Mowbray, because there's been other links this morning, and the name escapes me now, but the Chelsea coach who was in the island set up, Liam Manning as well has been linked. I mean, do you think if Nick's right and Tony Mowbray is the man, do you think he fits the model? Because I'm not quite. It sounds like he's worked with Stuart Harvey and in a similar model, so you'd assume that would be a natural fit.
Yeah, absolutely. We would have my full backing if he does come in. Experienced coach, wouldn't be overawed by the challenge of coaching Sunderland. I think he would be able to come in and maintain, the path that the club's on under Alex Neil. I don't think he would be a footballing dinosaur like Phil Parkinson. I think because he would inherit a much better squad than Parkinson ever had at his disposal for a kickoff. And yeah, I think he would tick a lot of boxes. He's probably not the most inspirational candidate. He's probably not a kind of guy who, is kind of hold the front page. But it seems to me, Chris, that that if it is going to be Tony Mowbray, that confirms what I've been thinking for quite some time now, which is that consolidation in the Championship is the club's number one priority this season. Which, in my opinion, is absolutely right. We cannot afford to drop out of this division again. We have to be playing Championship football in 23-24 next season. And there's no doubt in my mind that under Tony Mowbray we would achieve that. That wouldn't be an issue. I think he would get us solidly in mid-table. I don't think we would be anywhere near the relegation zone. It might not be the most entertaining football you've ever seen in your life, but I think it would be functional. I think we would be leaving games having seen them winning most of them or drawing most of them. And yeah, I think it would be a fit. And I know he's made. He made comments about Sunderland, after a game that we played against West Brom back in 2007 about how West Brom would finish higher than Sunderland after we beat them at the Hawthorns, and there might be a bit of bad blood there. But it's all water under the bridge now. At the end of the day, as Nick rightly said, the club cannot repeat the mistakes that they made in the aftermath of getting rid of Lee Johnson and then that very public flirtation with Roy Keane. And then it cost us 2 games, and then we eventually bring in Alex Neil, and then he's in on a salvage job. And I think that's why the dynamic this time is a little bit different, because whoever comes in is going to be inheriting a squad that's very much on an upward curve. It's still early in the season. It's not as if he's coming in with a couple of months and he's kind of desperately trying to save us from relegation or mark a promotion push. It would be all about consolidation. So yeah, I think Mowbray would be a safe, pragmatic choice. I think he would be a continuity candidate, Chris. I think he would very much be, a kind of a like-for-like replacement for Alex Neil, albeit with more of a willingness to work within Sunderland's structure.
Well, just on that point, Nick, I don't know if you've had any specific dealings with him, but maybe what kind of Gary Bennett said or anything like that. It seems to be that it's been highlighted recently as well. There's been a certain character that kind of works at Sunderland. If you go through the years, Dennis Smith, Peter Reid, Mick McCarthy, Roy Keane, Alex Neil, they all seem to have that toughness about them. And I'm not sure what Tony Mowbray is like, but do you think he fits that mould?
I would guess he probably does. I think we know him as a character from. I mean, I don't know him at all. I've never spoken to him, but I know a lot of people who do know him, because obviously, working at the BBC in Newcastle, there are Middlesbrough fans there. There are TV people who've had lots of dealings with him when he was at Borough and so on. All speak very, very highly of him and as a very nice bloke, decent bloke. So I've got no doubt, about his credentials, if you like. I agree with what Phil was saying about continuity. It will be divisive. I mean, I've seen on social media already a lot of Sunderland fans aren't happy with the notion that Mowbray might be coming in, and that's, I think, largely down to connections with Middlesbrough and being perceived as maybe a bit of a dinosaur. I haven't got those issues with him. I think what he did at Blackburn, he did a good job there in trying circumstances with the Aventis as owners. And I think he's got a tried and tested record at this level. And as Phil said, that's what we're looking for this season is consolidation. We're not looking, to finish in the top 2 and win every game. This is all about consolidation this season. And to my mind, acting quickly, moving swiftly, getting someone in who knows this league, knows this area, understands the expectations, understands the size of the club, is probably common sense. It's actually probably a very pragmatic appointment.
Yeah, and it's that social media vocal majority at it again, Nick, that aren't happy with with a certain opponent.
Well, yeah, see, the danger is being swayed by things like that. I think you've got to you've got to step back from this sometimes and look at it in the round. The overview of this is if you put a piece of paper down and said, right, here are the bullet points: experience, knows the league. Understands the club. I mean, he ticks all those bullet points, if you like. You're gambling, to my mind. If you bring in an up-and-coming young coach who's, not really had any league experience or much league experience, you're gambling. It's a big gamble. And this season, I don't think Sunderland can afford to gamble. They cannot get relegated.
Yeah.
Whatever happens this season, the elephant in the room is relegation. They cannot afford to go back down to League One. So a safe pair of hands, to my mind, is essential. It's absolutely prerequisite in whoever you appoint.
Yeah, well, I'd like to think we're still looking up the table, but there you go. And typical of football to throw up these quirks, Nick. Rotherham at home on Wednesday, and then if Mowbray is appointed, Middlesbrough on Monday, where he was, of course, a player for 10 years or whatever. Then he was manager for a couple of years. So a couple of huge games coming up in the calendar, Nick.
I think every game's huge. I mean, to the old cliche, I think, Alex Neil was always right in saying, I'll take the next game and then we'll deal with the next game after that, after this one, so to speak. Rotherham's the biggest game now. I've got no fears against Rotherham. We know Rotherham. We've seen them last season. We know what they offer. We know what Paul Warren's teams are set up like. They're strong. They're physical. There's going to be that aspect of the game that Sunderland have got to deal with. But I'm not sort of scared of Rotherham on the evidence of the football that I've seen Sunderland playing this season so far. I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to games and I'm looking forward to them because the football's good. And, we're seeing, some quality play now at this level. And Rotherham, bring it on, basically, is my message.
Well, on that note, and before another major incident is declared in the world of Sunderland Association Football Club, we should probably call it a day. Thanks, Phil. Always a pleasure, mate.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you very much.
Good stuff. And thanks, Nick, for shedding some much needed light on the past 48 hours and taking the time out for us once again. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Good stuff. And thanks again, everyone, for listening. Keep a lookout at ROKER Report for all the build-up ahead of the Rotherham game in midweek, as Nick said. And keep an eye out in all the usual places for the next pod that should be dropping very soon. But from us, bye for now.